Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs, the podcast for burned out, career-minded moms who are ready to stop pretending everything's fine and feel like themselves again. I'm your host, Christy Amir, burnout coach for moms, licensed therapist, and mom of two. And I'm here to help you reclaim your energy, your identity, and your peace of mind. Whether you're lying awake thinking about the 87 things you didn't get done, or silently resenting the people you love most, this is your space to feel seen, supported, and not so alone. So grab your coffee, hot, cold, or day old, and let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Christy. Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs. In today's episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Angela Tipton. At 19 years of age, Angela was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, yet she refused to let her chronic illness define her. Ambitious and career-driven, Angela built a successful career over the next decade with various Fortune 500 companies in the biotech and life sciences industries. While building her career, she maximized her income, made significant financial investments, and paid off $85,000 of student debt in 18 months. While optimizing her savings, she learned to live below her means so that she could live life on her terms. Angela started her first business in 2017 and today focuses her efforts on helping people achieve financial freedom through their careers at fireyourcareer.com. She's passionate about building a career to fuel a fire lifestyle because she believes that everyone deserves to live life on their terms. In her free time, she enjoys yoga, running, and traveling. Angela lives in Salem, Oregon, with her husband and two little boys. So I have invited Angela here today. She's going to talk a little bit about her story, share some of her wisdom from the work that she does. And also she's going to share some of her experiences with Crohn's disease, specifically, how she balanced those health issues with parenting, with the demands of a career and her business. So, Angela, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Christy. Great to be here.
Yeah. Do you mind could you maybe start by telling us just a little bit about yourself, your family, and the work that you do?
Absolutely. So, yes, let me start with the beginning of my career journey. I've always been a dedicated person and very ambitious and wanted to achieve a lot in my career. In fact, when I started my career, my dream was always to become an astronaut. And I decided that I was going to dive into the world of science to eventually get to this world. Things didn't exactly go as planned, as you might note from my career journey, but it's been a fulfilling journey all the same. And my family means the world to me. In fact, after I had my oldest son, he really inspired me to make a pivot and a change in my career. And I can talk a little bit more about that as well. But my career journey has been interesting, to say the least. I pivoted from very science, technical centered roles to eventually pivoting into marketing, which is something that I loved and enjoy doing. But really, what empowered me the most was learning how to use my income and finances and balance this life that was so fulfilling and find a way to become empowered in my choices with the FIRE movement, which is something that I came across some years ago, which is what I focus on these days at Fire Your Career. So there's a lot to unbundle there, but it's been quite a journey.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I hope to get to all of it. I'm really interested to hear about the FIRE movement. Before we get to that, though, I'm really interested in hearing more about, your experiences, as I mentioned, with Crohn's disease, and how that's really affected your journey, as a working mom. So you had mentioned that you got your diagnosis when you were 19, and you said that you were not going to let your diagnosis define you. And so I'm curious, if you could take us back to that time, from what you remember, what was going through your mind when you learned about the diagnosis, and how did that shape the way that you approached adulthood and your career?
Yeah, so that for me was really one of the first moments where I had to make a sort of pivot in my life because as I had mentioned, my aspiration was to become an astronaut. Well,
Mhm.
I was also realistic and I realized that astronaut testing requirements are very stringent. So your chances of becoming an astronaut with the Crohn's diagnosis are, nil to none. So
Mhm.
I had to take a healthy dose of some reality there. But that said, I didn't entirely change my passions. If anything, they kind of reshaped and redefined themselves. So I never lost my passion for science, for instance. So when I received my diagnosis at 19, first of all, my first kind of emotion was relief because I'd actually experienced symptoms years prior. I started experiencing symptoms when I was 15 or 16. And I would get testing done, and the doctors would tell me, "Oh, we don't know. Nothing appears to be wrong with you." I knew
Mhm.
that something was wrong, I just didn't know what. So when I received that diagnosis, it was that moment of validation of, "Oh, okay, now I know something's wrong." But then after a certain while, reality did set in and I realized that, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to live with this. I'm gonna have to figure this out." But it was a tough time in life for sure, but it also helped me feel empowered with the choices I'd made. So for instance, 19, I was young, I was still in college. I was going to school in upstate New York, which is where I was living. And after a certain while, I just decided, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't really like the school that I'm going to. I don't really like living in New York. I'm kind of tired of the New York winters. I tended to feel sicker and not as well in the colder months, anyways. So I thought, I'm going to make a change. And I did. I ended up transferring to a school in Oregon, which is where I still live to this day, oddly enough. And it ended up being a really empowering choice. It's not what I would have expected out of my journey, but it ended up taking me
Uh-huh.
on this path that ultimately became so much more fulfilling. No, I could not have predicted the things would have worked out the way they did, but it really was so empowering. That's not to say that struggling with Crohn's has been easy or nothing. It's been a struggle for sure, and I've had to figure some things out, but it's
Mhm.
also helped me focus on the things that matter most in my life.
Well, and to your point, not that you wanna have that diagnosis, I'm sure, but once you heard it and you had that validation, and then you could start to think about, "Okay, now how like, this is real, like, what I'm dealing with, it's a real thing, and, there's really something that's going on, and now how do I move forward with this?"
Right.
Now I have to laugh just a little bit because as I was listening to you talk, so I am currently in upstate New York, lived here my whole life, and I'm looking out the window at the snow. So I kinda had to laugh, as you were talking about getting away from that a little bit, but anyways, not to get away from the topic. So I'm curious, like, did you ever feel, this pressure to, with work and everything, to push through your symptoms or to prioritize things other than your health to keep up, to keep up at work? Like, how did you navigate that, not just emotionally, but also logistically?
Absolutely. And in fact, this is something that admittedly I still struggle with to this day, especially in those early days after my diagnosis. I just learned to push through. I learned to push through as a kid because, the world around me was still moving. It wasn't slowing down. I might have felt the need to slow down, but I've always been ambitious. So I always wanted to continue to achieve. I didn't want my diagnosis to slow me down. Yeah, I might need to make some changes and do things a little bit differently, but I wanted to keep pushing forward. That was important to me. So honestly, it was more of discovery and understanding myself and my needs. It's
Mhm.
been a long journey, admittedly, but over the years, I did start to learn certain skills, brought on new tools, things like that to just help me manage those things, help me manage my symptoms, manage my health, help me have a healthier mindset, all of those things. For instance, for me, and again, this has been a long journey. I didn't discover this overnight,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
for me, it looks like taking care of my physical and mental health. I really enjoy doing yoga, taking just a space to get away and just be in my own mind, in my own space, and work out in a place that I can control. So yoga, running is really important to me. I also am a big proponent of meditation and just finding that space. It's funny that I talk about this now because my husband is also a therapist, and he used to push, you need some self care. And the
Mhm.
first time I heard the word, I thought, "What is self-care and why do I need it?" 'Cause
Mhm.
it was a bit of a foreign concept to me, and, I've come a long ways, but I've learned that, okay, self-care is not this optional thing. It is
Mhm.
something I need to do in order to take care of myself and to be able to maintain doing the things that I'm able to do. So, it took me a long time to discover that and figure it out and build in those systems for myself, but once I've done that, I've been a much more capable person from a
Mhm.
health standpoint, from a mental health standpoint, all of it. So it is really important.
Well, yeah, and I think, self-care, I'm glad you brought that up because I do think that it is so important, and I think it's something that so many people, moms especially, really struggle with, finding the time, prioritizing themselves, like prioritizing the self-care, and a lot of times they end up doing it after they've already sort of gotten to this point of, like, burnout, just really high
Yeah.
stress levels versus, putting it into their lives in this regular routine kind of way that acts more preventatively, which it sounds like is more what you do now. So now it's just these things are part of your everyday life. I'm
Yep.
curious though, like when you maybe were in that state of, say, high stress or burnout, what were some of the signs for you that you were pushing past your limits?
Yeah, that's one area where in some ways you might say my Crohn's diagnosis was actually helpful because for me, it was very, very obvious when I was too
Mhm.
stressed and I was feeling burned out. For me, it manifested as physical symptoms, things like abdominal pain, nausea, exhaustion, not being able to eat, not being able to maintain my nutrition, things like that. So in that sense, at least, it was very obvious for me when
Mhm.
my set of systems wasn't working well for me, where my physical and mental health were suffering. It wasn't just the physical symptoms, those were the most obvious and easiest for me to notice, but there were those mental symptoms too that just not being able to cope with simple stressors like I can't think of a specific example, but just as a hypothetical example, oh, my car broke down. Oh, it's
Mhm.
the end of the world, I feel
Mhm.
awful and I can't do it. What do I do? You just spin. You tail spin and into somewhere that's not helpful. So there were things like that that honestly I struggled with a lot throughout my 20s. It wasn't until my 30s that I started to finally be able to notice these things, but there were very obvious symptoms, and again, that's where the Crohn's symptoms would stand out. My health is severely impacted by stress, so it is
Mhm.
super, super critical that I maintain my stress. So when I'm not doing that, it shows up very obviously.
Well, and so when you use that example of, like, a car breaking down, I mean, obviously, that's gonna be stressful for anybody, but varying degrees of stress, and it sounds like if you were reaching your limits, like, you might start to notice more times like that where maybe you would be going to these worst case scenarios and sort of thinking about these situations in a catastrophic kind
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
way versus like, "Oh, shoot, my car broke down. This is, like, really stressful and frustrating, and what do I do about it? How am I like, how am I gonna handle this situation?"
Right. Mm.
So, were there ever times when you questioned if you could keep up with your career, a demanding career while also taking care of your health?
Absolutely. It is one of those things that I have asked myself throughout several periods of my life of, can I keep doing this? Does this make sense to keep doing this? Do I need to do something different? So that's happened often. I would say I don't think there was really a moment where that happened before I had kids. But once I had kids, I no longer had an obligation just to myself, but I had an
Mhm,
obligation to be able to show up to them, both in a physical standpoint, but also in a mental standpoint. So when they arrived, I started to realize that my choices no longer just had a consequence for me, but they also had a consequence for them. And that's where I chose to show up more and do better for myself. It was really ultimately because of my kids, because I wanted to be able to be there for them and show up in the ways that mattered to them. So there have been a few of those moments. When my first son was born, I was working as a lab manager and actually a very with a very well respected company that I still respect to this day. So it's not like it was a bad job at all, but I was in a position where I could not have a flexible work arrangement. It just with the role that I had, it just would not work out. And it was something that I was really seeking that I wanted to have so that I could be there for my son when I was a new mom. He was still
Mhm.
a baby at the time, and I did explore this idea of having a flexible work arrangement with my employer, and it ultimately ended up not working out, and I left the company, ended up making a career pivot. But I did, during that time, question, "Do I need to be here? Should I just quit my job? Should I stay home?" And it was hard to navigate that space for sure, but looking back now, I can say I definitely made the right choices, and at the time, I had family members questioning, "Why would you leave this great employer? Why
Mhm.
would you quit this great job?" And it was hard to explain that, but for me, it made sense, and I can say that now that it was definitely the right choice, but at the time, it was very difficult to make those choices and to navigate some of those changes.
Well, and I really appreciate you talking about that because, yes, I do think that anytime we experience a big change in our lives, such as having kids, things that might have been really great and might have, worked really well for us up until that point, maybe just don't anymore. And so I think a lot of times, and it doesn't mean that it's no longer a good place. It might just mean that it's no longer a good fit for where we're at in our lives right now. And
Definitely.
so I think that, when people do experience those changes, so again, such as having kids, it's important to remember that it's okay to, take a step back, reevaluate, rethink, if anything does need to change or pivot, know that it's okay to make those changes. And then down the road, maybe we change again. Maybe we pivot again when our kids are older, they're more independent, whatever it might be. And so knowing that one, that that's normal, and two, that it's okay to do that. So I'm glad that you talked about it because it sounds like, again, maybe people looking in on the outside didn't quite understand, but it sounds like you just really did. You knew what was best for you and your family, and you made decisions based on that.
Right.
Well, okay, and so again, so talking about kids, adding them to the picture, that's obviously you were already dealing with a lot. Having kids is another layer, it's another thing that we have to think about. And to your point, kids are really important.
Yeah.
They are a priority, once they come into our lives. And so I'm curious, like, how did so you talk about your pivots, but I'm wondering, like, what other things did you do? Like, how did you sort of manage the challenges of balancing the demands that you were already experiencing, health issues with your career, and now you've got kids, right? Like, what are some other things you did to navigate that?
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely a very wild moment in life where it was a lot to balance, and it still is, to be frank. And thankfully, I have a partner who is very supportive and very understanding, and works well with me to manage our household, with our childcare, with this or that needs to be done. So we've had that. We have some extended family that's been really helpful with that too. It's a lot to balance, and over the years, we've kind of reshaped how we've balanced things. So, for instance, we didn't always have someone coming to help us clean the house, but in more recent years, we've had that because we are just so busy. And now, so we just had another
Mhm.
baby in October, so now we have 3 kids. So we're very, very busy,
Oh my
and
goodness,
there are
busy
certain things.
household.
Yeah, so there are certain things that just slip, and if we didn't have that help, we never get it done. As it is with 3 kids, our house is very frequently messy, even with having a housekeeper to help us. So we brought in those
Mhm.
resources and those different tools. And my husband and I also prioritize making sure that we, despite a busy household, that we have time to do our self-care things. So for instance, he will work with me with his schedule to tell me to have a conversation about when I'm going to do yoga. Now, sometimes it is a bit like, fitting in
Mhm.
puzzle pieces that don't quite fit. Some are a little bit too large, some are a bit too small, and it's really hard to fit that. So we find a way to make it work, but it's just being
Mhm.
open and communicating those things. And again, thankfully, I have a very supportive, understanding partner that is also very open with our
Mhm.
communication styles, and that helps a lot. So we've definitely had to make some changes over the years,
Yeah.
busy as our household has gotten busier, but It works for us. It doesn't mean that things are perfectly in balance. We do find ourselves occasionally needing to rebalance certain things. Like, for instance, sometimes I'm spending a
Huh?
bit too much time on the family. I don't have quite enough time to get this or that done for my career. And then I'll just have a conversation with my husband about, hey, this week things just didn't work out. We need to figure something else out. So it definitely helps to have those conversations.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, not everything like perfection does not exist, right? So things aren't going to be perfectly balanced. And
Right.
like working well one week might not be what works so well next week. And so I'm glad that you have a partner who is supportive. You can have those conversations. It sounds like that has been really helpful for you. And then you had also talked, you were talking earlier and then you were talking again just now about the importance of the systems that you put in place. You were talking about how when your systems are in place, you just are able to manage things more easily than when they're not. And also boundaries, right? So you were talking about the boundaries with self-care, making sure that you are getting that in. You talked about leaning on supports and using resources, getting a cleaning lady. So it sounds like all of those have been really significant in helping you manage all of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely helped having all of those things in place. And we didn't just wake up one day and decide that, okay, we need this, we need that. It's been an ongoing conversation that is shaped and reshaped in different ways. So for instance, my two older boys are in school, so we don't need
Mhm.
the childcare support during the day for them, but we do need that childcare support now for my baby girl that we just had in a few months ago. So it's again just balancing and introducing new systems and support pieces as we need them.
Okay. Well, and I'm wondering, so again, these are things that I know a lot of moms deal with anyways, especially when they're juggling families and career responsibilities. But again, with this added layer of having this chronic illness, I'm wondering how has that shaped the way that you personally think about things like rest, like boundaries, giving yourself permission to slow down, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's definitely shaped my mindset when it comes to that. So I have learned the hard way that if I don't take care of myself and make sure that I'm getting what I need for my health, then everything else falls apart, right? I have learned that. I've had periods of time where I was just so sick that I could barely get anything done, barely get the kids taken care of. And that as a mom, it's so heartbreaking to realize that I cannot show up in the ways that I want to show up. So I have done more things in terms of setting up boundaries and rules for myself to make sure that I'm not in that place because
Mhm.
it is just so heartbreaking to be in that place, and it's also hard on my partner who has to lean in that much more when he has so many things on his plate too. So it makes the whole system a mess if I'm a mess. So I have to focus
Yeah.
and prioritize that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very specific example, I get once every 7 weeks, I get these infusions of a treatment. It's just one of those things I have to do to maintain my health, and I prioritize that as number 1 above everything else, including, yes, my children.
Mhm.
As hard as that is, because I am one of those that if I am even a week late, it can set me into a flare. I am very sensitive in that sense. So when that treatment time comes around, okay, that's number 1 priority. What are we gonna do to center our world around that thing? It's not what I want to do. Believe me, if I had the choice, it
Mhm.
is not the thing that I would choose for myself. But I have again learned the hard way that if I don't do that, then everything else falls apart. So I have had to set healthy boundaries to say, nope, this is not going to interfere with that. I've had to cancel my kids' doctor's appointments to prioritize my infusion. I don't want to
Mhm.
do that, but nothing can interfere
Mhm.
with that because if anything does, then the rest of it falls apart. So it's hard to have to do that. Again, it's not what I would choose, but it sometimes those situations are placed on us and we have to choose how to deal with it, and that is how I deal with it, and, it helps keep me going and
Mhm.
keep the whole system running as it needs to.
Mhm. Well, and just this idea, I mean, you're obviously talking about a specific situation where you feel like you really have to prioritize that, because it's just so important. But I also think it's just serves as this reminder that, we prioritize the things that we value, we prioritize the things that we do see as being important. Even if they're not necessarily things that we wanna do, when we see them as being especially important, we are more likely to prioritize them, and so when we go back to this idea of, like, self-care and having a hard time prioritizing that for ourselves, really thinking about why is it important and knowing that it is okay to make that a central thing because not only do we deserve it, but it benefits everybody else. Like you were talking about having these flare-ups. I imagine when you have these flare-ups, it's not affecting just you, but it's affecting like your functioning within the household, right? So everybody else too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it sounds like you and your husband have really, come up with a lot of good strategies and systems and things like that to use at home to work well for your family. I'm curious though about the rest of the outside world, right? So for a lot of people who maybe don't have experience with a chronic illness, either personally or, somebody especially close to them, what's one thing that you wish more people knew about this, about navigating life, especially career and parenthood while having a chronic illness?
Yeah, so one thing that I would say that is important that's been both good and bad about having a chronic illness is that you really have to give yourself a lot more grace. I am
Mhm.
also a lot more understanding of others and other struggles because at the end of the day, I don't know what my neighbor is struggling with. I don't know what my friend, I mean, they might tell me some of these things if I ask them about it. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but it's grace. So granting yourself the grace and the permission that you can do this thing that you need to take care of yourself, but also be more understanding of your neighbor because we don't know what someone is dealing with. Having struggled with a chronic illness, I can tell you it has been the hardest thing that I have had to deal with and harder than even parenting, which you might
Mhm.
think that's insane because parenting is one of the hardest things ever. That's true. It is very hard, but
Mhm.
a chronic illness adds a layer of complexity that if you aren't in it and haven't dealt with it, you just can't understand that. So sometimes the best thing you can do is just accept that I can't understand this, but I'm going to accept that this is what you have to do for yourself or that this is best for me when I'm dealing with this. And the same thing goes for anything. It can be mental health, it can be some other physical illness. We don't know what those things are going to cost someone else, how that person is balancing those things. So be more understanding of yourself, but also of others. Grant that grace. I find that usually we can grant a lot more grace than most of us are usually granted or that we give to others. So I think that's a key thing to learn is that just be
Mhm.
graceful in all things life and accept that you may not understand it all, but that person is making the choices that they need to for whatever reason because of the circumstances, and they feel that that's best in their life for various reasons.
Right. Well, and it sounds like just this reminder that even if you can't see anything yourself, from where you're standing, everybody's got stuff going on and you don't know specifically what those things are for other people. And so to sort of be mindful of that when you are thinking about how you treat people, how you respond to people, how you support people, all of that. So, okay. So, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because I want to hear more about the work that you do. You had talked a little bit at the beginning about the fire movement, and I'm wondering if you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the FIRE movement, so FIRE stands for financial independence, retire early. I like to look at it as financial freedom that can be very customizable. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I've always looked at the retire early and others do that follow the FIRE movement as kind of this optional journey. Some people are very fulfilled by their careers. They love the work that they do and they can't ever really imagine retiring early. I am one of those people too. I love what I do in my career. And while I can't see myself taking a step back anytime soon, I have been able to explore career pivots, some temporary step backs while I invested more time with my children. And I've been able to do other things. And ultimately, what it comes down to is having the freedom of choice. So, FIRE or financial freedom gives you the freedom of choice so that you can live life on your terms. What that does is it frees you up from having to make XYZ income, whatever it is. You don't have to make a certain minimum per month. You can make maybe a little bit less. You could make none, maybe depending on how far you've progressed in your FIRE journey. So it really is just having that freedom of
Mhm.
choice. I get really excited about it because I truly believe that if more people had the ability to live life on their terms, the world would be a better place. More people would be happy. They'd have that freedom of choice to choose their career or not, to explore a career pivot, to start a passion project, or just to step
Mhm.
back and retire early, spend more time on the beach, spend more time with family, whatever that looks like. And that's really what it comes down to. And I get so excited about it because it's just about empowerment. It's about having the choice to live life on your terms, whatever that
Mhm.
looks like for you.
So does that mean, so if I'm understanding right, so is the work that you do essentially that of like a financial planner, but somebody who has more of a focus on, again, that independence, those choices, living life on your terms, and focusing on that aside from specifically like the money? Is that,
So
am
so
I
it's a
getting
mix
that
of
right?
both, really. So it's your income, so it's your career. So that's where really the concept of fire your career comes from. I aim to empower people following a traditional career path to have that income piece. So if you go to my website, you'll see all sorts of resources on how to build your career, how to be successful, how to negotiate for salary increases, things like that to really empower you in your career. So that's one side of it.
Mm.
But the other side of it is, yes, that financial piece. How do you budget? How do you save? How do you use lifestyle design to build a life on your terms? So it's kind of a skill of sorts. It's having your income on one side and then your finances on the other. The idea really is to live below your means. So if your income is the drawbridge, your monthly spending is the water. So the higher you can make that bridge, the sooner you're going to gain financial freedom because you'll be able to put more into savings, into your investment, so that you can live, in theory, off of those investments. Now, again, I like to make fire accessible. So that doesn't mean that you have to get to whatever XYZ investment portfolio. That might be your goal. Maybe you want to explore a fat fire concept where you're able to live very luxuriously off of this large investment portfolio. That is a goal for some people in fire. Maybe others are exploring more of a lean fire concept where, again, you're still getting a higher income portfolio, but you aren't going for as high of a value necessarily as someone that is looking for a fat fire uh, value. There are other subtle levels of fire. There's paying off debt.
Mhm.
There's being able to have so much in a savings account to help for your emergency fund in case of unexpected expenses. So again, I aim to make fire accessible. Doesn't mean that you need to pay off all your debt necessarily, though it'll certainly help. It doesn't mean you need to have a large investment portfolio, though that can help as well too. It's really exploring what is important to you by identifying your why. What are your values? What do you dream of
Mhm.
living in your life? And then
Mhm.
building in the career pieces and the finance pieces that support that ideal lifestyle.
Okay, okay. So, for people who are interested in learning more about this, more about the fire movement, you, the work that you do, where can they go to do
Yeah,
that?
a great place to start is right on my website. So fireyourcareer.com. It's spelled just the way it sounds. I also have a really handy resource if you're just getting started, you're curious about it, you don't know where to go. I have a free ebook called 7 Ways to Fire Your Career. And it has 7 very easy ways that you can just get started for the first time. So that's a great handy guide that you can use. It's easy to follow, free to download right on my website. So that's a great place to find me. You can also find me on social media. I also love emails. I have a newsletter. And if you want to just shoot me an email and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, I love to chat with people about all things related to financial freedom, building a successful career, all of those things so that you can build a life on your terms. So feel free to reach out in any of those channels that suit you best.
Okay, great. And then from when we were communicating before, I think you had also mentioned like social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest. Do you still use
Absolutely.
all of
Yep.
those?
Yeah, and I routinely post on those new resources and tools that are
Okay.
available.
Okay, great. So I will, make sure that all of those things, all of that information is available in the show notes for anybody who wants to learn more about you. So before we wrap up for today, if you could leave the listeners with one final message, one final piece of advice, what would it be?
The one thing I'll leave listeners with is that you deserve to live a life on your terms, and it can be so much more achievable than you might believe. Yes, it does mean that you have to set in a set of systems and processes to make it happen, but you're deserving of it. Whether you want to lean more into your career, take a step back, focus more on your children, it is possible to live life on your terms. It just takes an action plan to get there. So don't be afraid to define what that means for you and live for the things that fulfill you and make you happy.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And thank you again so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And as always, for the moms who are listening, if any of this resonates, if you found any of the things that we talked about today to be helpful or valuable, please share this podcast with any other moms that you know could maybe use some additional support because we are all in this together.